Hello and welcome to the Music Education Podcast. I'm Chris of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is brought to you by the Soundstorm Music Education Hub. Now, in this episode, I chat with Dr Elizabeth MacGregor about musical vulnerability. Now, Elizabeth has written a book around this subject of musical vulnerability. And through the conversation that we had, really the takeaways are that music is incredibly powerful. That's obviously something that we all probably accept as musicians or music educators because we love music, because it's powerful. But I think quite often in conversations that we have as musicians or music educators, we don't tend to acknowledge how kind of dangerous it can be, how a music lesson can actually be a negative thing. It's not always a positive or a neutral outcome. Sometimes, actually, music can have a detrimental effect.
So basically what I'm particularly interested in is what I call musical vulnerability, which I guess initially struck me as an important thing for music educators to reflect on, in as much as when we're in the classroom or the studio or wherever we are making music, there are often very positive things that go on, and they're the things that we read about and that we're passionate about and we post on social media or read in the news. And there are also things that go on that aren't so great, and there are times that we perhaps teach a lesson that falls flat, or teach a student who's completely disengaged or disappointed with what the outcome is, or genuinely really struggles with music and we're not exactly sure why, or they have quite a strong response to music that is not the one that we as teachers and advocates and educators are looking for. And so I started investigating this idea of vulnerability to help us think about how the ways that music can be positive are related to the ways that music can also have negative impacts on us. So the ways in which we might respond positively to music because it has really positive associations, like it's the music that our friends like listening to or that our parents listen to at home, or it might have really negative associations. You can think of sort of, I guess, easy go-to examples. You know, this was my grandma's favourite song and it was played at her funeral, and ever since then I've never been able to listen to it without crying or whatever. But so, you know, we look through history and actually there are much more profound examples of music being used as propaganda and even as torture, and in violent and quite traumatic settings. And I'm not suggesting that happens in our everyday classrooms, but we kind of need to appreciate that does happen around music, and that when we're teaching it or learning it, we therefore have a kind of ethical responsibility to deal with it well and responsibly.
So rather than just going into every music lesson thinking, well, as Adam Fisek, who deals a lot with psychotherapy and music and talks to me a lot about how music teachers can sort of see themselves as rescuing people. Like, I'm here to give you music, everything's going to be okay. And then actually little Jemmy's like, oh, it's really messing with my head. I'm too vulnerable right now to open up and connect with music.
And so often, I mean, the schools I go into at the moment, you know, there's only a handful of pupils for whom they come out going, wow, miss, I feel like I've really achieved something. And most of them are completely nonplussed, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to geography next and we've got a test. And so I don't know, revising the counties of England or something. And some of them are completely, oh, I hate this. Why are we doing this? Why are you playing us that? Why do I have to do this? And we can very easily, because we believe that music is important in schools and in education, and we want to advocate for its importance, we can often overemphasize some of those things and not necessarily be realistic about what being in a music classroom is actually like.
Since writing this, Elizabeth, have you found yourself becoming wildly unpopular amongst music educators?
It's very interesting because among academics,
Right.
I think people are quite into it. The idea of musical vulnerability. I think often when you talk to teachers about it, teachers who are on the ground every day, they 100% agree, because they can come up with those stories like, you know, so many. That's what their everyday life is like. There are occasionally times where organisations that advocate for music education are less keen to hear what I have to say, which I'm very much of the opinion that Chris Philpott holds, which is that we should be more concerned with music and consider it to be more important because of its capacity to do bad things, to have detrimental effects. It's actually far more important that we learn about it, that we learn to do it, because it has the capacity to have quite dramatic impacts on people's lives, rather than just because it's like having a warm bubbly bath and it's quite pleasant and it's a bit therapeutic at the end of the school day where you've done maths for the rest of the day.
Which is, it's really interesting talking about organisations, but maybe not being so keen on pushing that as an idea, because to use a very overused term now, the narrative is music is wonderful. We need more music. What are the government doing by squeezing music and arts out? I often notice, and have observed partly through all the conversations that I've been having on this podcast, that there's so much criticism of curriculum and space for music in curriculum. But it seems to me that actually music education on the whole has moved from being generally a very negative experience for everyone who interacts with it to something that is more positive. And really that seems to be the biggest thing to focus on, rather than necessarily more music. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And I'm always surprised. It always disappoints me a little bit, in fact, when people ask me what I do and I say, oh, I research music education. And if they're just, a member of the general public, they go, oh, isn't music education in a dreadful place? We hear on the news how schools don't teach music. Is that really true? And I say to people, no, it's actually illegal not to teach music up until the age of 14. And they go, oh yeah, I suppose it is. And obviously that doesn't mean that there aren't places that find ways around doing that. But, and I say, well, I work with some amazing music teachers who, well, all amazing music teachers. And the job they do is really difficult, but they do it. And different schools have different degrees of resources. And that's not even necessarily just to do with state schools and private schools. It really comes down to individual departments, individual teachers, individual pupils. But I think we're not in a completely negative place, but I think sometimes when you look at music education advocacy, we have somewhat unrealistic expectations.
Which can be detrimental in itself, can't it? Because often I feel as well, it seems slightly absurd to go like push more for music, and then people are seeing headline statistics of a huge number of children coming out of school not being able to count or read, for example. And it's like, well, music lessons are not so important. Obviously, I believe that maybe in a holistic way of giving a broader picture, but we can see that just shouting more music all the time is
yeah. And an interesting case in point recently was the BBC Young Musician of the Year competition. And I remember seeing several headlines, in fact, across news outlets that were, all the finalists are from private schools. This is dreadful. this means that our state music education has, it's gone to pot, it's gone down the pan. And this really frustrated me because I think two things. The first thing being that in the UK, if you look at something like the National Plan for Music Education, in England anyway, there is a very particular pyramid of progression, which says that ideally any child should be able to start at the bottom with whole class ensemble teaching. Then they might progress to small group or individual lessons that maybe might be able to be subsidised by the music service. And then they might join their county youth orchestra, and then they might join their national youth orchestra. And then they might go to a school like Chetham's or Purcell or Wells Cathedral School, subsidised by the government because they are the best of the best. So in some regards, we should be expecting the BBC Young Musicians of the Year to be at these schools, because it's not necessarily that their parents can afford it, but it should be that they've won a scholarship there or whatever. And that's what our system says. But the second thing being, and far more importantly, if what our teachers in our ordinary primary and secondary schools were aiming to do was to produce BBC Young Musicians of the Year, what would we be doing? Like, what would we do with all of those exceptionally high quality professional musicians who are winning prizes at the age of 15?
They can all be unemployed and competing for the same place in four.
Precisely. We don't have enough careers for people who go to music college, let alone for those who have had such a stunning music education at secondary school that they're going to be the next generation of professional musicians. And I think the sort of coming full circle back around to vulnerability, what we will all do though, and what music education should be equipping us to do, is to be able to respond to music in a way that is going to enhance the rest of our lives, that's going to mean that we enjoy listening to it, or maybe we don't enjoy listening to it, maybe we have quite strong opinions about it, and or it's something that actually, when we get dementia and our children tell us that we ought to join a choir for people with dementia, we don't we kind of go, okay, yeah, maybe that is something I could do, because I do remember singing in school and it wasn't that dreadful. Or we think, oh, I've retired, I could pick up that instrument that I haven't played since I was 12. But also to have the wisdom to be able to say, oh, I've retired, I want to pick up my badminton racket rather than my trumpet. And that's fine. And that's great. Yes. But people get very confused when you're sort of a music education advocate who then says, no, I think it's fine that people drop music at 14 and don't ever play an instrument again.
This is the most refreshing conversation on this podcast that I've had. You've given two sort of wildly unpopular opinions. I love it. Honestly, I that's just so wonderful.
Yeah.
And so refreshing, because it's such a echo chamber so often.
But I think as musicians, I mean, I don't.
Are you? Because what do you play?
Yes, I am a musician. And I very rarely say that of myself anymore, but I do. I am a flute and recorder player. I'm into early music, so I play baroque flute, baroque recorders. And I sang in a chapel choir in Cambridge for a long time, so I've done lots of kind of semi-professional choral singing, which I love. I think I have quite a mixed relationship with music, though. I think there are times when I love to engage with music. At the moment, I'm part of just a bunch of friends, basically, of all generations. We get together on a Sunday night and we just play baroque music for 2 hours.
That's a pretty niche group of friends you've got there, Elizabeth.
We play lute, spinet, recorder, flute, violin, cello.
Amazing.
It's wonderful. And we just, it feels very 18th century. We just play, we barely talk, we just play.
Okay.
We play all the way through with the repeats. Unless it goes really wrong, then we play it again. Or we really like it and then we play it again. If we don't like it, we move on. But there are other times when I really don't want to engage with music. And I think when you've been a musician and you are a musician, there will be certain musics or certain musical experiences that maybe don't always fill us with joy. There's always that experience where perhaps you're playing or singing with other people who aren't playing or singing quite at the standard that you expect yourself to play or sing at, or them to play or sing at. And it can make it very hard to make music sort of indiscriminately.
Oh, I always like that because that makes me feel better about myself.
There is that. And then I think, and I'm very patient. And then I think, no, I'm very impatient. I love this Sunday night thing because we just play. There's no expectation that you've practiced. Everybody's pretty good at sight reading. So we just get on and sight read and hope for the best. But I think, I find this is something I would love to keep sort of researching in the future. That awkward in between being an amateur and a professional.
Okay.
And I think a lot of music teachers find themselves in this category where maybe they even went to music college, or maybe they did a performance degree at university, or maybe they got a diploma, or they're an expert on their instrument, and yet they never quite made the mark to be in that band, be in that orchestra. Maybe they are like me and they play a stupid instrument like the flute, which nobody ever needs flautists because there's always 1,000 people who are better than you, even if you're very good. So you end up sort of holding this space where you're too good to want to go and play with a kind of back to basics amateur orchestra, but not good enough to play, in that that ensemble that you aspire to play in. And so you reach a point where I then sometimes find myself, I get sad when I listen to orchestral music, maybe that I've played in the past, and I think I'd love to play that again, but I can't ever foresee myself playing that again.
That's very interesting. I wonder if that's quite it's specific instrument culture, because if you're a guitarist, drummer, bassist, even double bassist, even keys again, if it's more of a contemporary popular instrument or folk instrument, I can still I'm a virtuoso guitarist, actually. I say that because it's so obvious in what I do. I've made a career out of going, look how good I am.
I am, yes. And you should be, why not call,
But I really enjoy
bashing out some Christmas songs with friends, or interestingly, sometimes I go to the ukulele because it doesn't have such an ego attachment for me, so that because if I sit down and play those Christmas songs with my buddies on the guitar and I'm getting the chords wrong, then I feel really self-conscious. They're looking at me like, aren't you, isn't this
you're supposed to be a virtuoso? Yeah,
so
you
if
said
I'm on the ukulele, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing.
Yes.
But yeah, I wonder if that's something with that, where if it's Western classical instruments, it's not something so, which is silly though, right? Because surely you can just join any kind of ensemble and sort of join in.
Yeah, and we do. I think we have these very rigid genre distinctions where, I did play a lot of folk music growing up, and I could play my flute or play my recorder in a folk group or for a ceilidh. And why shouldn't I be able to do that? And why shouldn't we be able to have high quality orchestras that have more than 2 flutes, or that, personally, I think the answer is I should take up the bassoon, and then I'd never be out of a role.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's some, I've heard it said, and this, I have no idea where this comes from, but by the time you've sort of reached an examined standard of grade 5, you're at a position where you can probably play for leisure for the rest of your life. You know, you're good enough that you can play music that is satisfying, or you can play with other people, but you're still you're still learning stuff. It's still satisfying to make progress, but you've got the requisite skills to be able to keep making that progress. And I think that's interesting, but there's something to be said for, when we think about music education, what are we equipping people for? And actually, you know, I have bachelor's, master's and PhD degrees in music, and actually I don't think they've made me a more satisfied musician. I don't think they've actually enhanced my sort of lifelong appreciation of music necessarily, because I've entered into this strange ground of unbelonging where you neither fit in that professional nor in that amateur sphere. So if music education means equipping people to play 4 chords on the ukulele so that they can play some Christmas songs every year, great, because that's really fun. Or to even just to have the openness to sing in the pub when they've had a couple of pints. Great, because so few people will do that now. And if actually in school or in music hubs or in sort of extracurricular settings, we can be equipping people to say, yes, it's a good and human thing to sing and play, then I think we've done our job to a certain extent. We can always go further, but
Amen. Let's talk about the negative side again. That's the dark side of music education.
There's a wonderful book called it's called The Dark Side of the Moon, which didn't mean anything to me, and took me a very long time to learn that that's a reference to Pink Floyd. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Which is about popular music and violence. It's a very depressing book, but it's fascinating. And it goes through lots of really sad accounts of really extreme music and musicians who do very extreme things, either on stage or when writing or composing their music, or the fan cultures that are associated with it. But anyway, that's by the by.
No. Well, that sounds interesting. But is that, when you were talking about the vulnerability thing, is that what you're partly talking about then? Is that sort of...
So I did... initially, I almost stumbled across this idea of vulnerability. I sort of saw the word being mentioned in different writing about music. You see it in some really extreme cases. So there's sort of heartrending scholarship into, for example, the use of music in concentration camps during the Second World War, or in the South African Wars, the use of music in colonization in different parts of the world, the way that a lot of indigenous musics were almost forcefully exterminated, in the same way that lots of indigenous languages died a death, quite literally. Then you get examples like those in Guantanamo Bay, which have been on the, they're relatively well known examples of
blaring Metallica for like 20 hours because it's culturally inappropriate.
Exactly. It's a cultural affront to people who are conservative Muslims. This idea of no touch torture, though, you're not hurting them because they can't feel it, except we can. And when it's particularly at those very loud volumes, you can feel music, you feel it in your body. And inmates there have talked about that feeling of complete psychological degradation, that you are completely falling to pieces. But what I think is particularly interesting is that And there's kind of two reasons why that happens. There's that, what you mentioned, the kind of cultural inappropriateness, the kind of extra musical associations. So Beyonce was a great favorite in Guantanamo Bay, apparently, because lots of sexualized, westernized lyrics. Right. So there's that kind of cultural association that of something that is wrong or inappropriate. But then also there's this physical, the way it moves us physically, that actually
visceral emotion of music. Just
exactly,
because it's intense and
precisely. Okay. And you can feel the bass in your body, and actually, even if you can't feel the vibrations, we naturally move in time to music, even if we're not consciously thinking about it. So that movement alongside music creates this kind of affinity, whether we like it or not. We're almost forced to engage with it. And it's inescapable. You actually cannot switch off your ears. You can't close your ears like you can close your eyes. Even if you're not chained to the floor, as you might be in Guantanamo Bay, you have to go quite a long way away to escape that music. Music is permeable. It crosses boundaries in a way that other art forms or sort of equivalent experiences can't necessarily cross. But those things can have sort of profoundly negative effects. That sense of exclusion from a space, or that sense of cultural offense. But they're also the same qualities that mean that music can be so powerfully positive. People go to clubs or concerts or festivals and stand right at the speakers because they love that, that proper sense of being moved with the music. Deaf culture is really into, if you go to deaf nightclubs, the volume is up so loud because that is
deaf. I was like, deaf culture. What is that? Is that some kind of like dark culture sect?
Well,
I don't understand. But okay, right.
I mean, it is quite. It has a whole culture around it, but playing music at that incredibly loud, volume, low frequency is what people love.
To feel that resonance.
And similarly, the cultural resonance, the music that we tend to love, is that makes us feel good about ourselves and included within a particular social situation, for example.
It's good to stand next to someone else who's resonating in the same way, basically, isn't it?
Exactly.
We don't know why, but it's
precisely cool. It makes us feel the same thing. There's that kind of emotional that makes a space feel a particular way, even when you don't know the person you're standing next to. But those things can have the same qualities of music, are what make it exceptionally powerfully good, and it potentially exceptionally powerfully bad. And I just that's incredible, isn't it? The way that music affects us in ways that can be valenced either way. That can.
So more like specifically then, because that's a beautiful example of it. Just to sort of come to terms with the fact that music can be bad, basically, isn't it? But when it comes down to the scenario of classrooms, how does that play out? Moving away from the sort of more extreme.
Yes. I do make clear in everything that I write that I'm not suggesting that being in the classroom is at all like being tortured at Guantanamo Bay. Let me give you a couple of examples. So these are from teachers that I've spoken to in my research, or classrooms that I've been in. So one example, several of the teachers that I spoke to researching concepts of vulnerability spoke particularly about neurodivergent students. So particularly about students who were perhaps autistic and had quite strong responses to music for whatever reason. So one example was as follows. Boy in year 7 or 8, so 11 or 12, and they were working in groups during lesson time I think they were supposed to be effectively performing a cover of I Will Survive. And he'd been working with his group in previous lessons, and they'd got their cover all sorted. And then the rest of his group weren't there for a lesson. They were on a school trip or something. So he had to join up with another group who were doing their cover differently. And they basically arrived at a bit of an impasse where he was trying to explain what he thought they should be doing. They were saying, we can't do that, we're doing it this way. They had a disagreement, and he actually ran away. So he ran away and hid. It took the teacher and the pupils quite a long time to find him. And you can look at that one way and say, well, it's some kids who perhaps weren't the greatest friends and they had a disagreement, and that's life.
Creative differences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's something about that scenario that it's probably fair to say that wouldn't have happened in a maths lesson or a science lesson.
Okay.
If he'd had to work with a different bunch of pupils for a science practical, you probably wouldn't enter into that situation where you had some kind of creative difference that you felt so strongly about.
Yeah. Okay, because it's more connected to it, because it's an emotional thing, and then he's going to be more, I don't know,
and that then
to
escape it, you have to leave.
Okay.
Because I think there is also that sense that if you've had a disagreement about your music, you're not going to then just sit in the room and listen to them do it the way you don't want it to be done. And he actually feels that he can't be in the same room as that music anymore. So he leaves. He runs away, as it were. And yes, it could happen in other subjects. And there are lots of reasons why some neurodivergent pupils might experience that in lots of different settings. But I think that inherent sociality of music, especially that, we talked right at the beginning about music lessons nowadays often being much more positive than they were maybe, 30 or 40 years ago. There's much more expectation that we do things where we work in groups and participatory music making, which is all well and good, except it reminds us that the relationality, those interpersonal connections, are integral to the way we make music and how we feel about it.
Okay.
So if you run into those social issues, that's a problem. And it certainly in the classrooms that I worked with 4 pupils for part of my research, and they regularly had huge arguments. And obviously they bounced back, and next lesson it was fine, and they had to because the teacher had put them in that group, and that was fine. But it meant that their music making was affected. There were bits that they didn't get onto, and there were bits that they weren't pleased with, and there were bits where they're shouting at each other going, "You're giving me a headache, it's too loud." And it is, it's physically quite painful. And by the end of their however many weeks they were working together, playing a piece together, they were like, "I never want to do this again. I never want to work with these people. I never want to play these instruments." And that's sad. They felt strongly about it.
I suppose some of those kids who, I don't know, have knocked their confidence as well uniquely, and just I don't want to do music anymore. It sucked.
And people forget, and I think teachers forget that if you even a one-off mention to somebody, that didn't sound great. You're not very good at that.
Yeah.
There's that classic, you speak to elderly folk who are like, "Oh, well, when I was 12, my teacher told me I wasn't allowed to be in the choir because I couldn't sing.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've refused to open my, I could never sing in any setting. That has a profound impact on people. In a way that maybe only a few other, maybe sport. I think the experience of being picked last for the team, that's quite profound. But very few school experiences necessarily have that gravitas, that lifelong impact. What teachers say and do, and whether they consider their pupils to be musicians or non-musicians, is really important, and the way they communicate that.
Well, I mean, even till recently, language like talented, for example, like gifted and talented programs for music and stuff, was being used really widely. I remember, in fact, just the sort of end of COVID, attending a CPD on, I think it was linked to was it called the Gifted and Talented program? I can't remember, but it was about identifying talented children in the classroom, which I just thought was absurd. And I sort of went along to almost like, how will I notice this? And I remember in the beginning of it, the people who are leading it, and maybe they're listening to this now and will absolutely hate me, but saying, how do you think you identify a talented student? And I said, well, maybe they're frustrated because they can't get it. And I was completely ignored, like I was some kind of crazy person. And everyone else was saying, well, maybe they've got a good sense of rhythm, or we're talking about like 5-6-year-olds here. Do you know what I mean as well? But I find that's haunted me ever since that is so recent. That is just being in the culture of us as music educators, and the damage that causes to sort of see a kid talented, not talented. That's still there. Yeah,
of those 4 students who I watched, it was fascinating. So one of them had instrumental lessons outside of school or in school, but they learnt an instrument. None of the others did. One of the others had he claimed, musical family, so his siblings and his parents played instruments.
That's a phrase you hear quite a lot as well, yeah. Okay.
Indeed. And the other 2, I don't think, had any particular musical experience outside the classroom. So whenever they played together or spoke together about what they were composing, they always deferred to the girl who played an instrument, who in fact, she was very bright, but she struggled. You could see her struggling. You could see that she found it hard to maintain the correct rhythm or keep the pulse. And also she learned an instrument that wasn't a samba instrument, which was what they were supposed to be playing. Right. So she had no more familiarity with the genre than anyone else in the room. But whenever things started going wrong, they started to defer to the boy who had no musical experience, and quite explicitly said, almost every lesson, I'm no good at music, I'm not musical, I'm a sporty person, I'm not a musical person.
What? How old are these kids, sorry, as well?
They were 11 or 12.
Okay.
He had impeccable timing. His sense of rhythm and pulse and musical structure, syncopation was perfect. It was quite right. And he could just improvise alongside one of his peers, no problem, not thinking. He would have no idea how to describe what he was doing, but he had it. And it was fascinating because every lesson they'd have this shift. They'd start by deferring to the experienced girl, and they'd end up following the leadership of the unexperienced boy. But it went backwards, and they never learned. They never learned that actually if we follow him, we're going to do better. Even though she was saying, oh, I'm not actually that good. Why don't we just listen to him?
Right.
So
And there was
people are
this-
really holding on to that stature sort of
Yeah,
hierarchical
because,
thing.
but also in the classroom, the music teacher knew the girl's name. She didn't know the boy's name. She knew that the girl played an instrument. She knew that she was coming on a concert tour. She didn't know the boy's name. Maybe the boy was going to miss some lessons because of a football match. So this was kind of reinforced by the teacher and by their peers, but also by our wider society that says, oh yeah, you had music lessons growing up, you must be musical, and you didn't, so you're somehow inherently not talented. And it was sad. I mean, in a way, as a music educator, it's sad because we can't necessarily change that. It's a bigger societal issue of the way we understand music and the arts and culture with a capital C. But individual music teachers can make a difference. If that music teacher had known all the names of all those pupils and had been able to spend enough time with each of them to see that some of them were exceptional musicians, even though they'd had no experience, then that could have made a real difference to them.
I'm quite interested what happens after that, though, when the teacher identifies, because ultimately the kid who you were talking about, who was into football and didn't think they were a musician, but had amazing timing, that's the, in inverted commas, talented kid. And then in some aspects, like going back to gifted or talented, then they then get the attention and the lift, and actually the girl who really wasn't connected with music just needed the right sort of intervention to be able to connect with me. I think so often with particularly young children is they just haven't quite connected with it. They haven't quite gelled to resonate with stuff, and they need a bit of time, or they need the right thing. So that can then become detrimental, can't it? And negative.
And if this boy had been spotted as gifted and talented when he was 5 years old and being forced to play, I don't know, the double bass.
Yeah.
Maybe he'd never have got to play football.
Yeah.
And maybe he was really great at he was really great at football.
Yeah.
And also that's great. And my sister wouldn't mind me saying this, that she's a very good musician, but she basically did music. She's my younger sister. She did music because I did music. And that was therefore like what my parents knew. They knew, you could join the school orchestra. Are you sure
she doesn't mind you saying that?
No, well, but she is very fit and sporty, but she never really did sport because it just wasn't something we did. And she looks back now and says, I wish I'd done more sport because I think I would have been really good at it. But I didn't because I could do music, I could play an instrument. And that's, and some people don't enjoy music so much and would rather do sport, and that's important. That's really good. And anyway, music and sport are really inherently linked anyway. So, and if you didn't have football fans singing in the stadium, then where would we be?
True. I think I'm going to call this episode "Music is Dangerous" or "Music Ruins Lives" or something like that.
Maybe not "Music Ruins Lives." It'd get so much bad rep. Yeah, but there's something, there's that risk taking, that kind of danger is what makes it.
Okay, yeah, music is risky.
It is, and because it's something that people care a lot about, and therefore, going back to the kind of physical nature of the way we listen, when we make music, it becomes on public display before we necessarily have agency over whether we want it to be on display or not. If you're painting a picture, you lock your studio until you're absolutely sure that you're happy for other people to see it. If you are practicing a piece or improvising or composing, it's very hard for that not to be made public with very little control, unless you happen to have a soundproof studio. And I guess now we do a lot of stuff on sort of digital music making is slightly different, but the noise aspect of music means that it's somehow bearing your innermost soul, even if you don't necessarily know who's listening to it either. You don't know who's walking past the window or the practice room, or it is a risk.
Risky stuff. Oh, amazing. Let's finish there. That was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.